Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to speak here today. Like Rich, I'm 30 years old too, and it's interesting, next week I turn 31. So according to a lot of youth, someone's 30 as well. There's three of us in the room, Rich. According to a lot of, I guess, youth statistics, we're moving out of this youth demographic to a degree. But I just want to say how powerful it is for each of you to be surrounded by so many young people passionate about so many amazing social and environmental causes. 7 years ago when I started YGAP with a group of friends, there's a bit of an accident in Melbourne, Australia. And I am told that Melbourne is an uncool version of Wellington, but it's getting there. I remember that there was two youth-led organisations in the whole country, and really no ecosystem. And we were lone wolves that started this organisation because we wanted to volunteer overseas, and long story short, every organisation we looked into was going to charge us $3,000, $4,000, sometimes $5,000 or $6,000 per person per program. And we thought that's bullshit. There's 10 of us, we're not going to spend $50,000, $60,000 to go volunteer collectively. But the infrastructure wasn't there, the ecosystem wasn't there. So I have seen it develop, and I've seen it grow, and I've seen it nurture in Australia, and I'm really proud to spend some time here in February and back here with the Inspiring Stories team to say how great the opportunity is for each of you that are passionate about these issues to be surrounded by so many like-minded people. So make the most of the opportunity while you have it. In terms of what we do as an organisation, we define ourselves as entrepreneurs that change lives. We find and enable impact entrepreneurs in some of the world's most toughest communities, working with over 185 entrepreneurs that have impacted over 91,000 lives across Kenya, South Africa, Papua New Guinea, India, Bangladesh, and moving into Nepal later this year too. But the way we do that is interesting too, as opposed to being dependent on traditional forms of fundraising. And this is a little secret for some of you as you're starting your ventures. There are very traditional ways you can fund your project. You can fund your organisation, and that's rolling over to the government and asking for state or federal money. That's being dependent on trusts and foundations. That's being dependent on corporate dollars, monthly donation programs, bequest programs, which all exist for a good reason and is funding available for not-for-profits. But as an organisation, we made a very different decision to be focused on two significant streams, and that's social enterprising and creative fundraising projects. This gives us full autonomy over our funding, and there's no dependency on donors, being governments or trusts or foundations, saying this is how I want you to spend your money and this is what I want you to do with it. So we have full autonomy about how we spend our money. So I'll quickly walk through some of our projects and then end with some of our impact too. We have a slight addiction to hospitality at YGAP. We run a cafe in Melbourne called Kinfo Cafe, and earlier last year launched a restaurant called Feast of Merit. It's a wholly owned subsidiary. One person's been there, that's nice. It is a long way away. It's in Melbourne, just outside the capital, just outside of the city in Richmond. But long story short, it's a social enterprise wholly owned by a not-for-profit YGAP. It's commercial in every sense. We have 38 staff. We run as a restaurant, breakfast, lunch and dinner 7 days a week. Got the #1 design award for hospitality in the whole of Melbourne, which is a very competitive industry, and spent bugger all money compared to the millions of dollars it's spent by other operators. But you don't walk in and seeing starving pictures of African kids on the wall. This is a commercial product, and we compete with all the other operators in town. The only difference is, rather than having private shareholders, every dollar that's earned goes back into the not-for-profit. We turn over $3.2 million with this restaurant alone on a very strong profit margin that's then invested into our outcomes. Now looking at scaling across the US and with product ranges in Australia too. Diversified thinking, but gives us full autonomy over our fundraising. We run two national fundraising campaigns, but I'll quickly speak on one because we relaunched this campaign for the second year 2 days ago. And it's our Polished Man campaign, which is running across 3 continents this year. Why we focus on this campaign? It's looking at the issue of violence against children. With the impact entrepreneurs we support, one of our focuses is on health and hygiene, looking at preventable disease and violence. When we look deeper into violence, we found out that 1 in 5 children globally, so 18.4% of kids globally won't get to the age of 18 without being physically and or sexually abused. So 1 in 5 kids globally that will suffer abuse before the age of 18. When we dug a bit deeper, we found out that men are responsible for over 90% of sexual violence towards children. looking at this issue, we found some great organisations that focus on the supply end. What happens to a child? The trauma, recovery, the rehabilitation, the reintegration. What happens to a child post-violence? The implications of violence. Very few organisations go to the heart and deal with the demand end, engaging men to be part of the solution. And so Polished Man was our first attempt last year at having a national conversation of bringing men to the table to have a conversation about ending violence against children. We do it in a very positive way. So we look at the positive aspects of masculinity, not looking at men just as perpetrators, because many men don't commit violence, but looking at men as role models, men as leaders, men as change makers, and, importantly, men as protectors. There's 275 million reasons why we run this campaign globally. 275 million children that will not get to the age of 18 without being exposed to violence. With this campaign this year, we're running it in New York, Norway, London and Australia with the ambition to raise $1 million. The initiative is asking guys to sign up to become a polished man, to paint one of their fingernails. Emasculate yourself. I remember the first time I painted a fingernail, I got it shellacked in a nice little nail salon bar. All the women are laughing, the guy's like, what the hell is shellac? You should try it, guys. It's actually quite emasculating. It's a nice feeling. I painted my right hand black and white in representative of the wonderful All Blacks, so I've got one black and white paint on this finger. But as a choice to emasculate yourself, to say, I'm prepared to challenge my masculinity. I'm prepared to wear nail polish on one fingernail to represent the 1 in 5 children globally that suffers physical and or sexual violence before the age of 18. Last year we had 16,500 men wear nail polish and raised $250,000 in 2 weeks. An ambition this year to raise $1 million for the first 2 weeks of October. And Kiwis are encouraged to jump online at polishedman.com and sign up too. With $1 million, we know that we can impact the lives of 200,000 people. 200,000 people, children, that will be impacted if we raise $1 million. And I'll quickly end by explaining how that works. We find and enable impact entrepreneurs from that early to mid-stage entrepreneurship space, knowing some great organisations up the pipeline, but really focus on that early to mid-stage entrepreneurship space. Again, looking at the issue of violence is one of our key focuses. As I mentioned, in our first 5 years, we've been able to impact the lives significantly and measurably of 9,956 young people's lives across 6 countries around the world. And I just want to share one story, because stats are all great, but at the end of the day, they're just statistics. Labo is probably the most inspiring person I've ever met in my life. Like Rich and I, she's 30 years old too, and the random person up the back. I met Labo in April last year whilst in South Africa. She snuck into our entrepreneurship program. She was the 19th of the 20th person to get in. We weren't sure that her model was good enough to get in, but she got in. She then accelerated so well through the first round of the program, was one of the top 5 to be selected into our Changemaker Plus programs and given access to funding. At the age of 8, she was left homeless due to domestic violence. Her father was so severely abusive towards her and her sister with her mother, so they left homeless at 8. At the age of 21, she was married off to a community member, and she told me along a drive from Johannesburg up to Metiklu, where she lives, that a good week was being beaten up 4 times a week. Most weeks, 6 to 7 beatings a week from her husband. 6 months into this marriage, she ran away and left her husband and was ousted by the community. For the second time in her life, left homeless due to domestic violence. And now, like a lot of you, I presumed I would do the same thing by trying to escape this violence. Drugs, alcohol, trying to escape this reality, whatever it may be. Labo, at the age of 23, started a domestic violence clinic called Metiklu Clinic that provided care for about 350 women and children annually. When she entered our program, she was running 1 clinic. We looked at her model and said, how many domestic violence centres are there in the northwest province of South Africa? And she said 40. I said, do some research. How many are well-funded enough and have access to enough resources? And she said about 15, 16. So there's 24 or 25 other domestic violence centres in your province that lack funding and lack resources. So she flipped her model and focused on an accreditation program that not only supported those 24 under-resourced and underfunded domestic violence centres, but it's gone right across South Africa and really supported, through amazing accreditation programs, all domestic violence centres in South Africa with a vision to support Pan-African domestic violence centres. Barack Obama, and it's a bit of a theme today, but Barack Obama said in December 2012 that the hope of South Africa lies in the hands of 3 people, and went on to tell Labo's story. We gave her very simple advice, and it's now flipped her whole model, and she's changing the face of not just South Africa, but Pan-Africa. Our simple goal is by mid-2018 to impact the lives of 1 million people, and we know we can do so with a real key focus on finding and enabling the best local change makers, the best local entrepreneurs with big visions to see about change in their community too. Again, I encourage you on this journey, where I was 7 years ago and didn't have access to these type of networks, to these type of like-minded people, to spend as much time as you can with the people around you. And as Rich said, do not listen to advisors. Every advisor told us not to touch Feast and Merit. And we signed a 20-year lease in Swan Street, Richmond, without a dollar in the bank. We now run a $3.2 million business, where in 5 years we want it to be a $30+ million business. It's not the support of the advisors, it is that ability to trust yourself and trust your peers around you. Again, thanks for your time and enjoy the rest of the festival.